Okay, so I think we can start. So I'm very happy to announce our today's speaker, Dr. Milan Ćirković. Milan is senior research professor at the Astronomical Observatory. He published many books and papers in astrobiology, philosophy of science, and risk analysis. And today he's going to talk about Epicurean cosmology and the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. So Milan, the Zoom is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. This is a great pleasure, and I am very happy to be here. This is an interesting opportunity for a true interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary meeting of minds, so to speak. So I'll actually have a kind of improvised presentation, which I'll now try to share with you. Just a second. Let us hope that it will work fine this time as well. Okay, and let me press this small button here. Okay, now I hope it is visible to people. Okay, this sounds like a kind of jocular topic, but we shall see, I hope, and I'll try to persuade you that there is some much that doesn't meet the eye, and I'll, in that sense, I'll start with a famous fragment of Heraclitus that we should expect the unexpected, no matter how paradoxically that may sound. So because we are searching for answers to some of the deepest questions ever posed by at least human intelligent beings. We shall talk about some other alternatives later. My main point here would be that Epicurus and his followers were true precursors of modern science, and in particular modern cosmology and modern astrobiology. And that this philosophy, Epicureanism as a general concept, offers insight into some of the biggest problems we are facing in science today, including both fine-tuning of the universe and the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. And in turn, this is something which Epicurus and his pupils left us. In turn, we can ask, obviously, what we can do for them, in a sense. So from the modern perspective, I think it is easy to show what would be the most adequate resolution of some issues, especially on the perennial problem and or controversy, if you wish, about gods in Epicurean philosophy. Okay, now I'll try first, I'll go backward in a little bit. I'll go first with some modern stuff, but before I go there, we should ask, of course, the question, obvious question, are there precursors in the intellectual world at all? Because as, for instance, Jorge Luis Borges argued in his famous essay, which is 2.5-page long essay on Franz Kafka, which is one of the most influential, if not the most influential piece of literary criticism of the 20th century. It is true that each author creates his precursors. His words remakes our understanding of the past, just as it will remake the future. So, in a sense, I mean, this is an interesting ahistorical, or if you wish, anti-historical viewpoint, which would be very close to heart of many modern philosophers, especially philosophers of science, especially post-positivist philosophers of science. But I will try to demonstrate here on this example of Epicurean cosmology that, in fact, we have good reasons actually to accept this Borgesian position, because just as our thought is obviously influenced by early ancient materialist, naturalist philosophers, there is also a very well-defined manner in which our present-day ideas influence our reading and our interpretation and our evaluation of those people who have been dead for many centuries or even millennia. Okay, now, as far as modern science goes, consider, for instance, this. Astrobiology is a rather modern multidisciplinary field, which is concerned maybe mostly with those three often called canonical questions, often called, ironically, a little bit, how does life begin and develop? Does life exist elsewhere in the universe? And what is the future of life and intelligence in the most general cosmic context? In a sense, it can be illustrated by those three icons like Miller-Urey's experiment, which is the foundation of our studies of the origin of life, and then protein synthesis, which occurs every day in each one of us and in every living creature on our planet. And obviously, what we see here at the rightmost image is something which is an artistic vision of the semi-prophets for extraterrestrial intelligence, which is obviously a future-oriented enterprise. And I will later come to the point which is quite important for our interpretation of the Epicurean cosmology, which is actually that we should keep in mind our temporal position in the overall flow of cosmic time, because this temporal position offers us a key for understanding whether, in Lucretius' words, our world is old and decaying or young and growing. We can, of course, since its inception in late 1990s, astrobiology has grown dramatically. There are many fields of different disciplines, not only astronomical, also geosciences, also ecological, also some paleontological issues, and of course, obviously, philosophy. Many interesting philosophical questions which were provoked or teased out by our both observations and theoretical advances in modern day astrobiology. You can also see that there is we can put a kind of time chart which is confusing. Of course, obviously, it is intentionally confusing because it was made to prove that we are doing a lot of things. So actually, this is something which, but in any case, it shows the acceleration of important discoveries and important moments in last, say, quarter century or something like that. One of the most important issues for contemporary science is what is often called the Goldilocks problem, or fine-tuning in more general, more cosmologically minded way. You remember the old fable. I mean, one bed is too long, the other too short, and the third one is just right. One porridge is too hot, the other is too cold, and the third one is just right. So actually, we need to ask ourselves often a question as observers in the universe. We are located on an obviously habitable planet. Now, why is Earth habitable? People will give some kind of proximate reasons. It is located in the right kind of galaxy, it is located in the right kind of planetary system, it has stable temperature, stable rotation, etc., etc. But this is, and we can, of course, these are not just reasonable. We can nowadays support them by not only by thought experiments, but also by numerical experiments. And we can actually make quantitative analysis of some thought experiments. Suppose that, for instance, you can move Earth closer to the sun or further away from the sun, and then if it were closer to the sun, it will be too warm. Water vapor will be lost. Carbon dioxide would be impossible to remove. So actually, we will end up in something like a Venus state, which is not habitable. And then we enter into this area of just right, just like this bed or this porridge or this chair, which is just the right size for Goldilocks, where we have stable temperature. If we go further away, it will gradually become too cold, and at some point we would not be able to compensate by strengthening greenhouse effects and other warming processes. And so at some point it will end up like Mars today, which is very dry, very cold, and maybe not completely uninhabitable, but in any case, uninhabitable for more complex life like plants and animals and ourselves. So in this narrow region in between is called circumstellar habitable zone, and it is something where everything at least regarding temperature and availability of liquid water is just right. Now, we obviously see that this is a kind of a narrow ring, a narrow annular ring. We have infinite number of positions of planets similar to Earth, which are not compatible with life, and just a very finite and narrow set of positions which are compatible for life. So the origin of this fine tuning is obviously a problem. And of course, we encounter the same thing in cosmology. When we discuss whether physical constants and cosmological parameters are conducive to existence of life, that is obviously the case in our universe. This is empirical fact, and there is no doubt about that. But we can ask, why is that so? For instance, I mean, there are many examples. For instance, the ratio of gravitational to electromagnetic coupling strength, or strength of those two forces, is very fine-tuned. I mean, you can change it a little bit, and then you would end up with some non-habitable universe, at least from our anthropocentric point of view. We can also fiddle with other numbers like initial low entropy of the universe and other important cosmological parameters, and then we also tend to end up, at least in our thought experiments or numerical experiments, with the universes which are not habitable in a sense this universe around us obviously is. So do fine-tunings need an explanation? Of course, we should ask them. We could be kind of very skeptical philosophers like Craig Callender and some other people who argue for a position which is, I mean, a little bit seriously, a little bit half jokingly, half seriously called explanatory nihilism, for arguing that, for instance, obviously the values of fundamental constants and cosmological parameters are just brute facts, and we actually don't need any further explanation. Not very many people subscribe to that option. Most people would like to have a deeper explanation, if not for any other reason, at least for the reason, obvious reason, that we can always go back to explanatory nihilism if everything else fails. I mean, if we don't have anything better, if we don't encounter any better explanation, we can always say that, no, that is a brute fact. And history of science also tells us that essentially what people regarded as brute facts usually turned out to have a kind of deeper explanation. So if you accept that fine-tunings need explanation, then you can go with either design hypothesis or the multiverse hypothesis, which is essentially two most popular options. There is a third option, which is a kind of exotic one, that there is a kind of coevolution of universe and observers. Although some people who championed that view, such as John Archibald Wheeler, were pretty famous, this option somehow didn't really get off the grounds, as they would say, and many people would still argue that it kind of put a horse behind the cart, or vice versa, cars in front of the horse. Well, so I'll limit myself just to discussing very briefly design hypothesis, which is obviously the idea that the universe and all its basic parameters and fundamental constants was designed with some kind of habitability or friendliness to life and observers in mind. Now, of course, that was the standard theist position, those Western monotheistic religions stemming from Judaism over centuries and millennia. And of course, we can encounter it in a kind of a very developed and sophisticated ways in works of some contemporary theologians like William Lane Craig and some other people. But recently, say like maybe since 1980s, because the development of cosmological theory of inflation actually fostered speculations along that line, there is a kind of naturalist version of the design hypothesis in which actually we can assume that in one way or another, the universe as a whole is a construct which occurred by creation and by designer, but not necessarily supernatural designer. That is sometimes that option is called lesser designer. That would be some kind of, you can draw some analogy with the Gnostic notion of a lesser creator or a demiurge who created this world, although he is not all powerful and has not all those attributes which are usually conferred only to a single monotheist deity. I will return to that point later because this actually naturalist version of the design hypothesis is important for interpretation of gods in the Epicurean worldview. And of course, alternatively, and most scientists would perhaps subscribe to the multiverse hypothesis, the idea that there is simply many different cosmological domains, like many universes, and many universes create a multiverse. So this is a kind of semantically clear the origin of the word multiverse, because the whole ensemble of universes is called the multiverse, and the multiverse is sufficiently general, sufficiently symmetric, or if you wish, sufficiently all-encompassing to have both non-habitable and habitable domains. Obviously, since we are talking about fine-tuning, maybe we are not talking about some kind of rough tuning, we are talking about fine-tuning. Fine-tuning implies that the allowed region for those parameters is rather narrow, so that habitable universes will be a small minority among all universes within the multiverse, but still there will be both kinds, and we can actually quite reasonably, and the only rational thing would be to conclude that we are located in one of those minority universes which actually does possess such qualities that enable origin and evolution of life and appearance of intelligent or conscious or self-aware beings like ourselves. Okay, now this lesser designer or naturalist designer stuff is interesting. As I said, I mean, although it has some sort of a Gnostic prelude, it got really off the grounds with the works of people in inflationary theory like Alan Guth and Andrei Linde. Andrei Linde actually popularized the expression basement universes in a sense that, I mean, obviously he meant it as a joke, but it is again a half joke, half serious idea that ultimately with the advance of physics, especially high energy physics and quantum field theory, it would eventually be possible to create a whole universe in a lab or in some basement. Which will be, of course, topologically, we know from Einstein on that actually the geometry of the universe is determined by its energy content, and we can also fiddle with topology a little bit, and then we can create universes which are really not only created in a basement, but they stay in a basement. From the outside they are small, they are looking like small black holes, for instance, and from the inside it would be a kind of full-fledged universe which contains many star planets, supposedly living beings, etc. An alternative was proposed by Nick Bostrom in a paper in Philosophical Quarterly in 2003, which is entitled "Are We Living in a Simulation?", which is also a kind of the old Cartesian idea that maybe somebody is fooling our senses, and we believe that we are living in a real universe, and actually it is some kind of either hallucination or simulation in today's terms. Obviously, our own simulations are very crude so far, but they are improving, and they are improving very quickly. And any fan of video games especially can testify to that, because actually, and interestingly enough, much of the development of both software and hardware in terms of simulation is motivated by advancements in video gaming. And if that trend continues for not very long. I mean, we are not talking some cosmological timescales here, but we will rather soon get to the point that we can simulate things like entire planets or like entire planetary systems with very high resolution, with a resolution which is actually comparable to resolution of our own empirical research. So actually, this is, and with a philosopher of science and philosopher of religion, Mark Walker, I wrote this paper, I mean, which is somewhat immodest to cite here, but actually it contains a kind of a more detailed discussion of why we actually should not interpret astrophysical fine-tuning as something which is obviously pointing out, even if we accept the design hypothesis, if we accept the design argument, then we don't need actually to draw the conclusion that it implies rejection of naturalism, and that it implies a kind of supernatural agency and supernatural capacity, because it may turn out that lesser designer, which is endowed only with natural capacities, maybe much more advanced than our capacities nowadays, but still not supernatural, could still produce the same kind of effects and the same kind of fine-tuning which we observe in the universe at large. Okay, now we can return to the Hellenistic era and discuss in which manner, obviously we all know this is just a very brief recapture of why Epicurean philosophy, especially Epicurean cosmology, is actually a foundation of modern science in many ways, notably going from a more general to a sort of a more particular perspective. We have the idea of cosmos ordered whole, governed by natural law as opposed to chaos. We have ideas such as physical materialism and naturalism. We have atomism, which led directly, not only, of course, obviously, first generation atomist schools also insisted on that. But what is actually new in Epicurus is that actually he allowed for indeterminism, the famous, the swerve, which we have we have read much, and the talk of Professor Cooper at this seminar also was very useful in this respect. She reminded us that the swerve got much publicity recently with Stephen Greenblatt's eponymous book, The Swerve, which is a popular book which contains some errors, but it is still very useful. I mean, I found it very useful for kind of sorting out the thoughts on this subject. And I'll try to show a little bit later that basically the swerve is so radical, so dramatically advanced idea that it was complete. It was a kind of a miracle that anybody actually could come up with something so strange and so bizarre and so opposed to the mainstream of our both philosophical and scientific thinking for a long time, at least until 1920s, although there are many people nowadays still who are vehemently opposed to the implied indeterminism of natural world, although our absolutely best physical theories, which were confirmed literally thousands of times in experiments which are so precise nowadays that the probability that the obtained results were obtained by pure chance and not by real physics are such that we wouldn't have enough paper in the world to write a number of zeros, 0.00000% chance that it is not due to real physics, but due exclusively to chance. So actually, there is a whole mountain of empirical research actually which confirms that absolutely outlandish intuition of Epicurus and his followers. And of course, he was also, although that was not that obvious and it was played down by subsequent commentaries, but he was also a proponent of empirical research as well as what we would call speculative philosophy. So, and of course, there is another key idea that we have a kind of infinitely many worlds, or at least very many worlds, within an infinite cosmos, which is important because it actually shows that Andrew Gregory and other recent students of ancient philosophy actually were completely correct in concluding that the correct construal of the term world, especially in late ancient philosophy, is actually to understand it as a kind of planetary system, or something which is a kind of almost self-contained world, in a sense that it may have some interaction with a wider universe, but it is a kind of self-contained unit, which is important for understanding this strange, at first, Epicurean utterance that God lives in the inter-world space. And of course, there are many other things related to Epicurean philosophy, which we cannot really discuss here. His ethics, his individualism, his hedonism, etc., etc. Now, what is also a little bit slightly important to understand is that Epicurus' journey was a kind of a long and pan-Hellenic journey in which he actually went to a lot of places before settling at Athens about 306. Which is important because that was the time of the greatest conflict and strife, the wars of Diadochi or inheritors of Alexander the Great. So actually both economic and general security of the times was very, very low. So actually there are many people who were sorely tempted to interpret this chaos in human affairs as a reflection of wider chaos in the universe. And this is a kind of opposite to what Epicurus actually taught, but could be actually in some sense connected with his notion that the world is fundamentally unpredictable, following from fundamental indeterminism of atomic interactions. Of course, obviously, before him, Democritus in this famous fragment 9 in Dils, which was preserved by Galen, states that essentially what we need is just some kind of reductionist ontology, where he says, or Catherine Freeman translated by convention, sweet is sweet, bitter is bitter, hot is hot, cold is cold, etc. All these secondary properties of the world and things around us, but in reality they're only atoms and void, moving through the void. Of course, atomism is immediately linked, and that is also something which was just belatedly understood to the idea of evolution, because as Thomas Huxley, the famous Darwin's bulldog, argued in about 1880, the chessboard is the world, the pieces are, okay, he used the language of chess, but anyway, that's the same thought. Rules of the game are what we call the law of nature. And of course, when they asked Richard Feynman, who was one of the greatest physicists of the 20th century, if he could just preserve a single sentence from the entirety of our scientific knowledge, he said, obviously, without much thought, he said immediately that all matter consists of atoms. This is so important, so revolutionary concept even nowadays in the 21st century. So actually, it makes no surprise. Actually, nobody proposed better single sentence in order to convey to perhaps, I don't know, like our descendants after a global apocalyptic catastrophe, if somebody survives and finds just a single sentence containing a piece of our knowledge that all matter truly consists of atoms. And obviously, if you have a finite number of atoms or finite number of types of atoms, you can use them as this as Lego pieces in order to construct everything we empirically observe. As again Borges would say, all the books contain every possible ordering of just 25 basic characters. So you can convey any amount of meaning and any nuance and any subtlety of meaning using just 25 basic characters. And of course, obviously later Quine argued that you can actually use 2 characters, which is obvious nowadays. I mean, it was a kind of revolutionary thought in Quine's time, but nowadays when we are living in a kind of a digital civilization where everything is based on zeros and ones, I mean that thought comes rather naturally. And of course, I mean, this is the swerve or declination or clinamen is important because it is idea of a process which has no cause. That is very important because it is a fundamental natural process. This is not some complex like entity like God, and they say, oh, existence of God has no cause, as theologians have argued throughout Middle Ages, for instance. This is a kind of a fundamental process among smallest parts of material world, which occurs presumably all the time, and which directly helps explaining chancy or unpredictable or indeterministic nature of the apparent reality. So in the letter to Herodotus, Epicurus affirms that the world is both indeterministic and unpredictable. Of course, obviously, the world could be deterministic and unpredictable as well, and that is how many people, even in the Newtonian universe, actually argued, and later it got fancy name of deterministic chaos. Deterministic chaos is when you have deterministic interaction between small parts, but it is still, the whole is still unpredictable because you need a kind of exponentially increasing time and resources in order to give find better and better predictions of the future. But if the world is at the bottom level, indeterministic, then of course unpredictability comes as a straightforward consequence. We cannot have indeterministic world which is basically fundamentally indeterministic, which will be anything but predictable in very, very rough terms, which is something which we have. Obviously, when you look outside and see that it is raining, then you can predict with some degree of latitude that the temperature has dropped compared to this morning, or that you will get wet if you go outside. And these predictions may turn out to be correct. And of course, they are very rough predictions. If you want to make them finer and finer and finer, at some point you will reach the level at which you cannot really make intelligible even predictions in the real world. The real means indeterministic world, or at least sufficiently indeterministic. Of course, obviously, this is a point of contention among philosophers, especially for some reasons, which I have often discussed with philosophers. There is a sort of a wholesale resistance against the facts of indeterminism of the world, which is the reason why, for instance, some rather bizarre interpretations of quantum mechanics like Bohmian mechanics are so popular in philosophical circles, although there are very few physicists actually who would support them. In any case, the swerve was something which is so far ahead of time. This is a kind of a total understatement, and one could argue that the swerve was actually proven right by the famous two-slit experiment, which actually is at the bottom of all quantum phenomena. And as again Feynman would say, this is the single mystery of quantum physics: is why, when you, for instance, put electrons through this setup where you have two slits and then detector. Now later, you cannot really. It boils down to the fact that you cannot really say where electron is, although it is a particle, and you cannot say whether it passed through slit 1 or slit 2, because actually it seems that it passed through both without at any time being divided in two. Now, if you think that impossible, that is exactly why this is the mystery. The term mystery comes exactly from that. Quantum mechanics actually predicts with astonishing degree of success that the electron will pass be in the same time at 2 points without ever being divided or separated into two parts. So actually, this is something which occurs without cause, because it is found. It is the behavior of the quantum world, and it is exactly analogous to the idea that apart from deterministic interactions, Epicurean atoms have also this indeterministic swerve component of their motion. And for the final, most important ingredient we need here is that Epicurus, just like many other ancient philosophers from Pythagoras perhaps onward, actually argues for multiplicity of worlds. Now, there was always a kind of interminable controversy about what does that exactly mean. It was obvious that it is incompatible with for instance, Ptolemaic Aristotelian view of a single universe with this geocentric structure when Earth is fixed in the center of the universe, and there is a kind of set of spheres, and the sphere of fixed stars is outermost, and beyond it is just some sort of celestial realm of God, angels, whatever. So actually, this is a kind of polar opposite to this. And so there was just many debates. I will actually, and there is also, okay, before we come, there is also the interpretation which seems applicable in the interpretation of Gregory, who argues that these are in fact just planetary systems. That is really there is more in common actually with the Aristotelian worldview, because those planetary systems could be, okay, they could never be all geocentric, but they could be a kind of a planetary centric, but with multiplicity of them. Of course, that would violate all those perceived appealing features of the old Aristotelian worldview, which actually appealed, for instance, to church authorities, for instance, in the course of, say, trial of Galileo, and to all people who actually resisted Copernican heliocentric revolution. But in general, the notion that the worlds are almost or completely or almost separate from one another is actually would be, you can reach it by a kind of generalizing the Aristotelian notion of a closed and finite world. As Lucretius would state in Book 2 of the Rerum Natura, since space is infinite, we cannot be unique. That is an important thing to have in mind, and that worlds occur by chance when the sufficient material conditions are met, without any needs for gods or teleology and stuff like that. And it is, when you read Book 2 of the Rerum Natura, you get the impression that the idea of growth and decay of worlds is not just a metaphor. It is more closer to a kind of biological fact of, say, growth and decay of an organism, or growth and decay of a plant or a leaf or a fruit, something like this. This is not something which is used just on the metaphoric level. Andrew Gregory, in this wonderful book, Ancient Greek Cosmogony, I found it wonderful. I don't know, maybe that's my astronomical bias, but he argues very persuasively, in my view, that proper construal world in Epicurus and other non-Aristotelian sources is akin to post-Copernican notion of a planetary system. Because after all, if you remember that one of the arguments against Copernicus and his followers was that they actually allow for too much empty space between stars or outside of our planetary system, our solar system. Okay, we now call it solar system because we have accepted Copernican heliocentric view, which is correct, at least compared to the geocentric. Obviously, subsequent improvements have been very welcome. But the thing is that actually is between stars, between Sun and other stars, and between individual planetary systems, there is much space, and there was complaint that actually heliocentric Copernican picture allows, without reason, without sufficient reason, for a lot of empty space separating individual planetary systems. Now, if we understand the worlds in this manner, then much becomes clearer, and especially in concerning the debate of the Epicurean gods. And here I would like to quote an unlikely source, which is Agatha Christie and the famous detective Hercule Poirot, who actually, I think in Death on Nile, actually said the following interesting sentences, which any philosopher would find a little bit disturbing. It is not important who the suspect is, it is important who the suspect is. Obviously, the difference is in emphasis, because in first sentence, the emphasis is on suspect, on the suspect. It is not important who the suspect is, in a sense that it is not important what's his name, for instance, what his first and second name. In the second sentence, the emphasis is on the last is. It is important who the suspect is, in the sense that it is important to establish what qualities, what properties, what characters actually make him or her the suspect. So this is here. This is important to understand here, because you always have attempts to dissolve controversies, to dissolve problems, by alleging that this is just a kind of semantic problem or a language game or something which can be actually if not pushed under the rug, and then, or at least left for future generations, in order, because we don't have sufficiently good terminology, we don't have sufficiently sophisticated system of words in order to denote abstract and very complex phenomena and concepts. There was this is the famous, this one of the famous, or maybe infamous actually, passages from Lucretius' poem, which actually made him and Epicureanism in general a kind of non grata in Christian circles in general, and in religious circles in general, because he argued actually that the divines or gods live in peace outside of the realm of between the worlds, without any contact with us, without any sort of judgment or impositions, or like ordering of our lives and our empirical reality which we perceive around us. So this actually motivated a question whether Epicurus was an atheist, and there was this whole Ciceronian school of thought which started with Cicero, and through many authors, including important translators of De Rerum Natura, such as Lucy Hutchinson, who actually argue that this is, with various degrees of various degrees of repellence or abhorrence of such a doctrine, that it is actually exposition of an atheist doctrine. Now, there are people who actually argue to the contrary, that this is not the case, that the charge of atheism stemmed from Epicurus and, by extension, Lucretius' rejection of teleology and divine providence, and that actually we can say that gods exist in a sense of idealizations or some like moral icons or abstract sets of virtues, which are a kind of a reminder to us having no objective existence. And of course, there is a contrary school of thought by, say, David Constant, for instance, who argued that no, they objectively exist as atomic compounds. They exist as in the same way as this, I don't know, like a tree or a chair or anything, or a house or anything around us exists, which is made of atoms, as Epicurus explicitly argued for. So actually, this is a sort of a controversy which lasted really for a long time. And if we need to just examine both letter to Herodotus and other fragments of Epicurus himself, and of course the Rerum Natura, we would conclude that Epicurean gods are something which is subject to the natural law, composed of atoms, still immortal. And of course, obviously, people who denied their objective existence actually found contradiction between these two properties. They say, okay, no, you cannot have something composed of atoms to be immortal or everlasting or eternal, because that would be contrary to the idea that all decay of everything is due to motion of atoms as well. But this is sort of a non-starter, because actually there is a clear way out, which is argued by Lucretius here, because he said, oh no, this is their immortality or ever-presence is not something which is defined by their nature. It is something which reflects their active stage of their existence, because he argued that it is exactly in spaces between worlds that actually there are sufficient atoms which can be used and which are used by gods to ensure their immortality. And they are also removed, they are also safe from all risks and dangers imaginable. They are removed in space, and they are removed in other dimensions, in, say, dimensions of interest from humans and human affairs. They, as I mentioned, inhabit space between worlds. That would be, according to Gregory's interpretation, between planetary systems. That would be kind of interstellar and intergalactic space. They achieved maximum control over atoms. This is a corollary of this idea that they actually use atoms on purpose to ensure their immortality. That is a kind of maximum control possible, implied. And they are morally superior, obviously, which was obviously motivation of people who said, oh, he believed in gods, but just as a kind of idealizations. This is exactly their moral superiority, which makes them so radically different from ourselves. So we have a list of some properties. Now, what actually David Constant and other people are actually completely on the right track, that you can expect such entities in an Epicurean, materialistic, atomistic, naturalistic universe. But the only thing which, the only small step further which needs to be taken here is just to interpret them in context of modern science, and that would be that the gods are a result of the same kind of evolution as humans. And that will be a kind of Copernican interpretation, but they just belong to a different reference class of observers, or they are what we would today call extraterrestrial intelligent beings, advanced, independently, older, much older. And this is not so shocking, actually, as it may sound, because there are actually many reasons to accept this. I mean, there's actually, after all, I mean, we can regard this the relationship between abstract Epicurean gods and ourselves, like the relationship between monolith builders and these hominin ancestors of ours in Clarke's and Kubrick's 2001 Odyssey, Space Odyssey, in which, let me remind you, the monolith builders never actually appear in the whole story. I mean, they're just like known as by some kind of geometric fact of their artifacts, if you wish to call them such. Lucretius argued that our world is young, especially in Book 5, verses 325, 327. And actually, lo and behold, our contemporary astrobiologists would suggest that actually, if we ever find life outside Earth, it will be much older than our life. Why is that so? That is in a brief. I mean, these are results the great contemporary New Zealander astrobiologist from New Zealand, Charles Lineweaver, and his collaborators actually produced a whole bunch of very interesting results in which they showed that essentially planets among the set of all planets like Earth, say in our galaxy, the Milky Way, Earth is a rather young phenomenon. And our Earth formed about 4.5 billion years ago, but most other terrestrial Earth-like planets in the galaxy formed about maybe 6.2 or maybe from 8 to 6 billion years ago. That is, they are billions, at least 1.8 billion years older than ourselves. So the quite clear reason why I mean, people sometimes, when one talks about, for instance, SETI projects, people sometimes ask, why do you expect to encounter culturally or maybe just technologically more advanced extraterrestrial species? And the reason is twofold. One dimension is purely logical, because we have just arrived on scene. I mean, the existence of human civilization is very short, extremely short. When you just like applied and you are just accepted in a club, for instance, that means that it is quite reasonable to assume that other members of the club have simply have more have been there for a longer time. I mean, this is just some sort of pure logic. And of course, you can go further and argue, as Lineweaver and his collaborators did, from actual evolution of matter in the universe, because these curves of his, which I here shown here, which show the rate of, for instance, formation of Earth-like planets with time, actually depend mostly on chemical evolution of the universe, which is something we are now having quite a good handle on. That is also an idea which actually has appeared in many places in popular culture, and I'll just mention two important milestones. One is Olaf Stapledon and his famous and repeatedly rediscovered novel Star Maker, which was originally written in early 1930s, and it is quite funny actually if you follow those things, that Star Maker is periodically each generation, at least once per, I don't know, 6 or 7 or 10 years. Then there are some culturally influential people who said, "Oh, I recently read a little-known novel, Olaf Stapledon, Star Maker," and they're just repeating and rediscovering it, in which Stapledon actually does a kind of a deep analysis of what could be called naturalistic transcendence, simply transcending limitations of our mode of existence, but not by supernatural means, but purely by a kind of naturalistic, essentially science-based means. As Stanislav Lem wrote in a very influential essay on Stapledon in 1986, it was written in a time when it was regarded as a kind of pure fantasy. What we have not realized, we have considered impossible. But in fact, we no longer consider anything to be absolutely and finally pure fantasy. So even if something looks like pure fantasy, looks like magic, there will be people who said, "Oh no, it is just an effect. It is apparently magic." There are underlying naturalistic reasons why you can achieve this or that, or like pull a rabbit out of your hat or do anything else. Of course, stage magicians do that all the time. I mean, they are just trying to, they are showing to you that actually what you empirically perceive as a kind of a miracle or something which is not achievable by naturalistic means, in fact is achievable by such means. And of course, Lem himself wrote a great essay slash story slash speech slash commentary on culture, blah, 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 whatever, entitled New Cosmogony, in his anthology of Apocrypha, as he liked to call them, A Perfect Vacuum from 1974. That was also a long time ago. And it is also has not been elaborated and elucidated enough. And from time to time, people just just stop in wonder how prescient Lem was there. His protagonist, Professor Testa, explains great insight, which won him Nobel Prize into unity of cosmic evolution in a speech where he argues essentially that there is no difference between natural and artificial. And if we ask, for instance, where are advanced extraterrestrial civilizations, the only plausible answer is they are everywhere around. Because what we perceive and we ascribe to natural causes is actually just a manifestation of their activities, which are so optimized and so smoothly blended with nature that we cannot ever hope to discern it and to establish a kind of meaningful communication with them. We observe, I don't know, whatever natural processes come to your mind. Grass is growing and, you know, like clouds are moving in the sky, or like some stars are moving in heavens and some stars explode, blah, blah, blah. And you think this is a kind of completely natural phenomena. But in fact, many of them are actually a kind of orchestrated activities of minds which are so powerful that they are by very definition not perceivable directly to us. This is some kind of naturalistic idea of what Christians would call Deus absconditus, or the absent and invisible deity. And of course, there is a kind of mini replication of that when we try to create our simulations. And we need just to think about conceptual extension of, say, video games like SimCity and SimEarth and stuff like this, in which you start with small number of basic pieces, and then you actually design larger and larger and larger and more complex and more complex and more complex combinations of those pieces, and you achieve a kind of emergent complexity. At some point, you don't need really to regulate everything. You need just to set a sort of a general background, and then the things, the complexity which arose within the system actually begins to govern itself. This is the emergent complexity, or as people sometimes say, self-organization or self-organized criticality. And those phenomena, which are studied in serious physics paper, not only in gaming circles, but in serious papers in, say, Physical Review E, or like some journals for life, artificial life, which is regarded as a kind of applied computing discipline. This is all these are kind of case studies of reductionist materialism of the Epicurean variety. And Obviously, such materialism excludes divine providence, but it does not exclude design as such. And instead of a summary, there is a kind of inspiration, perennial inspiration, I would say, of the Epicurean philosophy, which is actually growing in recent years. And as the great guy said himself in this passage from Letter to Herodotus, we need not worry unduly that we haven't really identified all causes yet. We haven't really finished sciences yet and reached sufficient accuracy entirely. We must not suppose that our entire, even if we cannot discover single cause for anything, including, settings and risings and eclipses and the like, as has been the case already in our investigation of detail, we must not suppose that our inquiry has not reached sufficient accuracy to contribute to our peace of mind and happiness. So actually, this is an interesting place, I think, to finish, because actually it shows that one should find peace of mind and happiness in science, and one should find the peace of mind and happiness in science in its unfinished form as it is right now. Okay, so thank you for your attention, and of course, it will be my pleasure to hear any comments, questions.
Okay, thank you very much for this inspiring and very informative talk, Milan. And I will open now the discussion. So anybody questions? I think that, is that Slobodan? No? No. Okay, I'm just checking whether.
Oh yeah, there are several hands up there.
Yeah. Okay. So any questions, comments? No? Well, I'll open it.
Okay.
I'll open it then. So the first thing, very interesting thing that I wasn't aware that it was that Lamb was writing about it, but that I found in Augustine in the City of God, the difference between artificial and natural. And what's interesting in Augustine, he first praises all technological advancement, and he says it's human genius that God gave us this, and human genius actually discovered everything that we need to feed ourselves, to heal ourselves, technology, all sorts of things. He praises it. But then it's interesting that when he makes the distinction, I think it's in the Trinity or here, when he makes the distinction what angels and demons can do. And these are demons, like these are these lesser gods, so to speak. They cannot actually make real miracles. The creation is the real miracle. But these guys can actually make things, invoke from the nature their hidden natures, so they can make things happen the way we can, but we are slower, dumber, we don't have their abilities, so they can do it, and it appears as a miracle to us, but it's not a miracle. Now, and there he says, so here, basically he says, what they can do is just to make a flower bloom faster, or something like that, but not anything contrary to what God planted in nature. So they can. So that was my thought. Actually, our technology is what they do anyway, but we have to discover it slowly, and they are just fast, and they can do it because they know laws of nature. So I found that idea in Augustine, and I was fascinated. It's very interesting. The other thing in Augustine and in late antiquity, which actually goes well with Epicurean idea, even though it's within Christianity, is that they debated whether these angels or demons are material or not. By the time of St. Aquinas, we drop the material thing and we go for the spiritual. But in the late antiquity, they were not really sure. So they were like, they are made of this fine material substance. So that's another thing that came to my mind that kind of mimics what you were talking about, Epicurus. And the other thing, the final thing, and so and then I will stop there, is that there is this debate that Diane and I were talking about many times between Celsus and Origen. And when it comes to these supreme beings that are ontologically higher than us, finer than us, among ancient philosophers, there is this need to proclaim that they are morally better than us. Like in Epicurus, these gods over there, they are better morally than us. They live their happy lives. But there is this need to say that gods cannot harm us, because that's a part of the philosopher's fight against superstition. So it's, again, you can find it in other kinds of another kind of philosophers, not just Epicureans, but I think that it's very important to kind of see the parallels between all these philosophical thoughts. They kind of fight the superstition, and they give gods, demigods, morally higher power. So we don't really make sacrifices to please them, because they won't harm us anyway. They don't intend to. They are morally better than us. So that's, yeah, these are my comments. Anyway, thank you very much, Milan.
No, thank you. These are excellent comments. Actually, I didn't know for that about that passage in Augustine. I mean, you should send it.
23rd book, I'll send it to you. I was studying it. I'll send it to you. Yeah.
That is actually very interesting, because one would argue there have been several authors who argue that this is some kind that would be completely in agreement with the idea that if only God is a source of natural law, even regardless of what you would consider, how to put it, the ontological status of natural law, whether it is a sort of a kind of absolute, or it is some sort of approximate or something. In any case, if the God is the only source of that, then obviously only God can presumably violate this and do something which is impossible by natural law. On the other hand, that would be completely in agreement with the idea that even these lesser supernatural beings are actually more like stage magicians. I mean, they are doing things which actually seem to us impossible, seem to us to be against natural law, but actually they could, if pressed enough, explain how one does that. And of course, this also this touches upon the idea which was present in ancient thought, and it was much earlier, which we have, for instance, in Empedocles. For instance, that simply our senses are often deceive us. I mean, often we see things which are not really as they are if we try to go deeper and dig deeper and establish some deeper causes, and then we will see that in reality it is not just as we see that. About the second point, it is also interesting to consider the debates. I mean, it is at least in part related to very interesting and, to me, endlessly funny and inspiring debates from, say, 11th and 12th century between, for instance, Peter Damian and like his opponents like Bonaventura and other people, about whether God can change the past, essentially, whether God can do that something which has already occurred is not anymore. For instance, he used this famous example of Rome being founded in 753 year BC, so that Damian argued that in his that famous letter, which was actually published as a kind of book, the Omnipotentia Dei, that actually could have and can at some point make that Rome was not actually founded in 753. And these other guys and Aquinas rejected that view because they will say, oh, that would mean that God would create a sort of paradoxical and intrinsically insoluble incompatibility of things in the world, and he would never do such a thing. And that is interesting. Nowadays, what is bizarre, though, is that if you imagine the universe created by a kind of a lesser designer, a kind of demiurge or something, then demiurge actually, or maybe even if our universe is just a huge simulation, whoever produced the simulation designer, so to speak, or director of the simulation could actually fulfill those Demian's criteria for omnipotence. And the way, which is incredibly funny, this is the way what kids use to cheat in video games, for instance. Imagine a video game which progresses like, I don't know, civilization, which you start with some settler and then you build your empire. Then obviously won't play, or most people won't play the entire game from the beginning to the end in one sitting. At some point, you need to make a save and to go, mother calls you for lunch or whatever. What is the status of the save file? In save file, you have, in some convenient digital format, you have all information about the internal state of the world. Now, if you are hell-bent on winning the game by any means, if you wish to cheat, you can edit the save file so that a posteriori you assign some benefits or advantages or add yourself 1,000,000 gold pieces or whatever. So actually you do something which is more than say Aquinas or these Bonaventura or these opponents of Damian, which is exactly in accordance with what Damian taught. You can the God can, in a sense, edit save file of our universe in order to change things a posteriori from some external perspective. Now, whether external perspective is intelligible to us inside at all is a different question. This is, in my very interesting philosophical, metaphysical question. Sense. But this is interesting that you can actually kind of revive this debate about various capacities of various agencies, including natural or supernatural. Once is something which is, in my view, very timely still in contemporary philosophy.
Thank you, Milan. I see Slobodan raised his hand.
Okay.
Yeah, he's struggling.
Okay, can you hear me?
Okay.
Yeah.
But maybe you can turn off the microphone.
I will.
Okay, so thank you very much. All this is really interesting and fun. Now, I mean, it seems to me that there are two kind of roads in understanding, in taking seriously atomistic, this early ancient atomistic thought. And one that you presented, I mean, you repeatedly seem to fall back into the kind of Aristotelian trap, expecting, there are these underlying laws of nature, underlying laws of the universe, and we understand them, and then there will be this higher being way ahead of us, which is going to basically obey these laws in different ways. And then now it's all fine, but it's kind of like a soft Epicureanism. Hard Epicureanism would be something different, it seems to me. We take swerve way more seriously. So in other words, the swerve means that the laws of the universe evolve all the time, and they actually evolve in creative ways, which are completely unpredictable to us, which means that when they evolve in one way, that really has nothing to do with other possible directions and trajectories that could have occurred if the swerve went, the other way, or so like the set of swerves went the other way. So really, the trajectory is in a way completely unique, and what we call laws of nature, what that sort of higher civilization way ahead of us will call the laws of nature, is just kind of rules of operation at that particular point and nothing more than that. And that's completely anti-substantialism of Aristotle. That sort of completely disappears. We can't even hope to find any sort of substance or laws of nature. And one of the consequences is that what we recognize as laws of nature now is really, we should really expect it to be kind of a joke, actually. What we perceive, for example, as space and time, as some essential characteristics, we should very quickly leave that aside if we continue our evolution as a species, and in the sort of march of the evolution of the universe. That's way more unsettling, I would say, in many ways epistemically, but might be truer to what the Epicurus sort of thought actually at the time. Okay, more radical, it seems to me. So I don't know if you have any comment or.
Okay, I mean here, okay, you touched upon several issues there. Okay, on one hand, okay, let's see, let me try to unpack it a little bit, but although it does require more thinking on my part for sure. But let's see, what I think is essentially, first of all, we need to separate, that is confusing. You mentioned that already, but that is a bit confusing. We shouldn't confuse laws of nature as a kind of concept from what are our discovered laws of nature. What is something which you open some physics textbook and read about there, because those things are obviously cannot be congruent until physics is finished as an enterprise, or at least until we reach this famous or infamous theory of everything, unified field theory or whatever. Only then we can, even in the best possible scenario, in the best possible world, we can only then say that we actually know laws of nature. I mean, nowadays, whatever we see is a partial. So if it is partial, then it means that it cannot, even under some very conservative, say under Hempel's covering approach, then it cannot really cover all of nature, and we can accept with complete honesty that those parts of nature which are not covered by our understanding of natural, our formulations of natural laws, it simply can be in principle chaotic. It can be not regulated, or we need a different kind of natural of laws to describe it, etc. It's one point. The other point is, even if there is a kind of chaos on the deepest level, which I guess is what you are aiming at, that doesn't mean that you can have arbitrary large part of the total parameter space, which will be arbitrary precisely described by some particular set of effective laws for arbitrarily long time. So it may be the case that, for instance, really at the bottom of everything is chaos and there is no ultimate set of laws. But on the other hand, we can say, oh, but this does not mean that effective laws which we have discovered will not be applicable for, I don't know, another 1 trillion years or another 10 to 100 years or something in our cosmic environment or in our cosmic vicinity, or maybe within our cosmological horizon, or however you wish to qualify that. So the temporal and spatial extension of a region which we find effectively ordered is never set. And there isn't some kind of scale in there is some particular preferred scale of space and time which would condition the application of effective laws of nature, even if they are not the whole truth. So in that sense, I would say that this what you call the Aristotelian view, I think that it can be, you can simply have a kind of asymptotic like set of various Aristotelian views nested one inside another, like those Russian dolls, in which you can have more and more comprehensible, effective laws, even if underneath all of them is pure chaos. Of course, obviously, that may not be the case, but it is still compatible one with another. I wouldn't say that it is entirely incompatible. Now, of course, obviously, from some sort of eternal perspective, but this is exactly because why Epicurus would argue that not only gods are subject to natural law, but they also to maintain they also need to be active all the time in the world to maintain their position of cognitive and perhaps moral superiority as well. So actually, one could imagine that some kind of picture in which, similarly as in mathematics, after Gödel's theorem, the work is never done. So you can have infinite number of better and better sets of natural laws, which go ad infinitum. So, but there is much to be discussed. That is a kind of extremely provocative comment.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any more comments or questions? Okay. So if not, I would like to...
There are few comments in the chat, but it's not questions.
It's in the chat.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, let me just check whether we have... I know, it's from David that it's going to be useful. And let me just check.
Oh yes, actually. Okay. Oh yeah. Let me mention this. Okay. Yeah. He mentioned communicating with aliens according to Wittgenstein. Oh yeah. Of course. I mean Wittgenstein's argument is very interesting. I mean it is essentially a foundation, obviously, a couple of decades earlier, of what is nowadays called. Often called biosemiotics, which actually traces ways of communication to our evolutionary characters and evolutionary origins, at least in more serious in a more serious parts. Obviously, there are all kinds of bizarre ideas there as well. But that is very interesting topic. Actually, I'm a little bit of a pessimist regarding that. I'm more agreeing with Wittgenstein that actually, or with Lem as well. I mean that actually, if the gap in capacities is too big, then we cannot really hope to effectively communicate with aliens, even if they are like have the same constitution and they are like also limited by the same laws, and we establish all things the same as that 2 + 2 = 4, and that universe is composed of atoms and electrons and quarks and whatever. So actually, it might be the case that I think that's a completely, of course, separate question from the question of their existence or not. But the thing is that I'm in that respect about establishing a kind of meaningful threat. I am a bit mildly pessimistic on that, and that's according to this comment as well.
I know. I mean, everybody's making fun of Wittgenstein's famous quote, and lots of jokes about that. How if the lion could speak, we wouldn't be able to understand the lion, and but the idea is like with the extraterrestrial intelligence. So if we don't share at least somewhat a form of life, meaning our habits, our desires, our wishes, including even the body shape and or perception and senses, it's really hard to establish. I mean, with the lion, we would probably find a way to establish some kind of connection because we are mammals, blah, blah, blah. So we could maybe establish and translate with the extraterrestrials. So we don't simply know. So it's an empirical question, in fact, when we find them, whether we could. Yeah.
Oh, yes. Yes, time will tell in any case.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Milan. And there are 2 more lectures in this series to be done. One is coming up on Monday. A speaker will be Pavle Stojanović from the Department of Philosophy. So stay tuned, and thanks for coming.
Bye-bye. Thanks again.
Bye-bye.